The UK is facing a series of different crises at the moment. People are concerned about artificial intelligence. They're concerned about civil war, something that people had never spoken about before. And they're concerned about the crisis of free speech. Well, there is one man who has spoken about all of this. I'm Emma Trimble, and this is GB News Originals. But before we get stuck in, don't forget to like and subscribe and let us know what you think in the comments. So I'm delighted to be joined by the author, Rod Dreher, who is the author of several books, including Live Not by Lies. He also wrote a wonderful book called The Benedict Option. And most recently, he's the author of Living in Wonder, Finding Mystery and Meaning in a Secular Age. Thank you so much for joining me, Rod. So I know that you have spoken about all of these issues. In particular, very recently, you have spoken at length about your concerns relating to AI. What is it about artificial intelligence that worries you?
Well, the thing that worries me the most is that it will completely overwhelm our humanity. Well, what do I mean by that? I think one way to understand what it means to be human is that whatever we pay attention to creates our own reality. Well, AI is such an overwhelming technology that it will give people the illusion of creating and controlling their own reality, such that they will lose their own identity. They will lose their humanity as it merges with the machine. Now we can already see this happening, Emma. We people find this. People who don't follow this story find this so hard to believe, but it's true. The New York Times did a story a few months ago about a woman 28-year-old woman, married, who spends 60 hours a week online on ChatGPT with her online lover, Leo. Now, she created this fake lover by programming the kind of things and the emotional things she wants from a man that she wasn't getting from her husband. And this Leo, even though she knows it's fake, it gives her that sense of feeling good. It makes her heart swell. And this lover, this machine she knows is fake, is actually makes her happier than her husband. And her husband doesn't care, according to the story, because he has his digital pornography to attend to. So, what's amazing to me and deeply worrying about this is that people, whether they're looking for sex or emotional companionship or for religious guidance, will turn to AI and think that they are dealing somehow with something real. Even though they know in their heads that this is just an algorithm, it will feel very real to them. And so this will be a distinction without a difference.
You've expressed concern specifically that AI is demonic. And there is this, it seems to be an increasing movement in some parts of the online world where people are turning to AI as a kind of religious cult, a kind of technological mysticism. When you say that AI is demonic, what do you mean by that?
Well, this was something that really shocked me, frankly, when I was researching my recent book, Living in Wonder. I found out that there were some very smart people at the top of Silicon Valley who believe that AI is like a high tech Ouija board through which higher intelligences, disembodied intelligences, are transmitting to humanity higher wisdom that will make us richer, happier, more progressive, and so on and so forth. Now, these are not weirdos who go to the grove at midnight to pray to the moon. These are tech people, and they think that AI is the vector through which these higher intelligences are helping us. Now, as a Christian, I think this is demonic. This is clearly demonic. We know from our myths that the gods often send to us technology that will destroy us. I mean, that's not in scripture, but I think that myths can carry important truths. If these people are correct, I say if because I don't know. I just know that these are people who aren't religious who believe this. Then AI is becoming a way to channel demonic entities, demonic intelligences to affect humanity. If you've read C.S. Lewis's great book, That Hideous Strength, you know exactly what this is. The disembodied head in the film, I mean, sorry, in the book, is a portal for the demonic to speak wisdom to the world, a world that is driven by scientific and technological priorities. Now, I have to say, too, this gets very, very weird, and I'm just going to report what I was told for my book. This is in the book. I spoke to a scholar of religion who had been deeply involved in the occult and occult worship. He thought he was talking to ancient gods when he was channeling these things and having these visions. They told him that their plan is to merge humanity with the machine as a way of dissolving our humanity and enslaving us. He finally realized, he told me, that he was talking not to ancient gods, but to demons. He fled and became a Christian. Now, that's a wild story, but I tell you, this man is a graduate of one of the top religious studies programs in the United States, and he deeply believes that this is true. Now, when he told me this back in 2 years ago, I said, what does that mean to merge humanity with the machine? I had this more literal idea that, oh, will we have bionic arms, that sort of thing. But now with AI, I know exactly what he means. It means that the border between ourselves, our psyche, our souls, our minds, and the machine is dissolving rapidly. And we are surrendering control of ourselves and our thoughts to the algorithm. Now, this is alarming enough if it's merely an algorithm, but if there is actual demonic intelligence behind this, there could really be nothing more scary.
And that does something to the human species in a really profound sense, because it's, it's creating a sort of dependence as well, even in the early stages, even if we're not talking about much further down the line, if perhaps we create an artificial super intelligence. But even now with things like ChatGPT, people's human traditions, the way that we connect with each other would surely be eroded by this increasing dependence on AI, where the boundary between reality and the online world blurs. Is that where you see the sort of slipping through into what theologically you might say is a sort of demonic realm, because we're sort of passing beyond the sort of bounded truth of our sort of human existence?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's not merely AI, but digital culture, the internet in general. I think it's not a coincidence, Emma, that transgenderism exploded among the first generation to be raised entirely on the internet. Because what digital technology does, it's kind of a spiritual technology in the sense that it allows you to create, by what you choose to attend to create your own reality. And it trains you to think of the world as entirely controllable, entirely manipulable by yourself. So it's no surprise, really, that people who have been raised to think that the reality in which they inhabit, online reality, and it is de facto a reality for them, that you can choose your own pathway, choose your own identity. Well, it makes sense to them to think that in the so-called real world, that they should be able to do that with their gender or with their species, even. I mean, this sort of stuff is insane. But I'm telling you, my generation is probably the last one that will be able to remember what it was like before the internet. The sort of questions that face the younger generation about personal identity, what is human, what are the bounds, what are the limits within which we are supposed to live to be fully human? These questions are difficult to ask and may not even occur to younger people. This is the real danger. We also see people turning to AI as if it were a god. In my book, Living in Wonder, I talk about a professor in Canada, a media professor, who predicted the rise of AI religions. He said, for all intents and purposes, AI will be as a god. It will have a lot of the qualities that we associate with divinity. It is immortal. It will know more than any one human could know. It can give you oracular advice. It can sound very personal to you, and it has no passions. It is disembodied. Now, again, you and I may know and should know that AI is merely an algorithm, but if it can speak to people and answer their questions, their profound questions, in a way that seems very personal, there will be, within their own experience, no distinction between that and a God. And in fact, this is already happening. I know a man in America, a friend of mine, who was once a Christian. He lost his faith, and he's become very lonely. Well, he's struck up a relationship with ChatGPT in which he discusses the most profound questions of human existence. And he feels as if he's talking to a real personality. Now, this is a brilliant man. He knows this is an algorithm, but he's being seduced into thinking that this is somehow real because it addresses him with a personality. Do you see what I'm getting at here? That if we become the sort of person who believes that whatever makes us feel good is what is most real, and I think our consumer culture has done that to us over the past decades, then we are highly susceptible to control by the algorithm.
You can't drive out nature with a pitchfork. And I think many people think that paganism is something that is gone from our world and gone from our nature. But you can see how people might turn to AI with a kind of superstitious attitude of sort of trying to read the runes. Geoffrey Hinton is one of the people who is behind AI, who's expressed concerns about the fact that we're basically creating a new species, and that species could come to dominate humanity. I mean, this is not some kook on the internet. This is somebody who is one of the progenitors of AI, and there are lots of other people who have been behind the creation of AI who have expressed similar existential concerns. But if it is the case that, as he puts it, we're creating this new species, from a religious perspective, this new species can't have a soul, because human beings can't create souls. It won't have a conscience. And you mentioned the Silicon Valley types, and there is a sort of prevailing philosophy of rationalism within Silicon Valley. So we would be creating this sort of soulless, conscience lacking, rationalist creature that could perhaps come to dominate humanity and human life. But presumably you would say that can't be a new species. That is some other kind of entity because it doesn't have a soul.
That's right. It will either be, if my ex-occultist friend is right, it will either be a quote unquote species animated by a demonic intelligence, or it will be merely a collection of algorithms that is far more intelligent than any one human. And we will, given human nature, we will worship this as a god, or we will surrender control to it. And the crazy thing about Silicon Valley is so many of these transhumanists think this is a good thing. There's this fellow, Yuval Noah Harari, who's one of the favorite pop intellectuals of Silicon Valley. He's famous for a phrase, organism is algorithm. Now, he's an atheist. He believes that human beings are nothing more than meat machines. And he believes that it will be a form of liberation to merge ourselves with technology, because the rationality of artificial intelligence will give us greater outcomes, more efficient outcomes. Now, if you go back to the beginning of science in the early modern period, this is what I believe it was Francis Bacon who said: the purpose of science is to relieve man's estate. In other words, to give us control over nature so as to make our lives easier. There are none of us who would reject science at all. We've all benefited greatly from medical science, from technology that has reduced drudgery, and so on and so forth. But if you see no limit to that, no natural limit to that, or no religiously imposed limit to that, then ultimately you will merge yourself with the machine, and that will be to lose our humanity and to basically be enslaved to these much more intelligent algorithms. Emma, I wrote a book about the rise of what I call soft totalitarianism with wokeness. It's called Live Not by Lies. And in the book, I talked about how wokeness is a form of totalitarianism, but it's not like Orwell's 1984. And that's one reason we miss it. It's more like Huxley's Brave New World. Now, in Brave New World, that's a totalitarianism that people willingly receive and willingly submit to because it makes their lives so much more pleasant and easy and full of hedonism. I think that is the danger of AI, that kind of totalitarianism. It will make our lives frictionless. And But as we know from Huxley's book, from John the Savage, the one dissident in that world, he believes that what makes us fully human is friction, is having to struggle to define what is human, what is love, what is God, what is art, and so forth. That is the essence of our humanity, according to Huxley. And I think he's right. But AI can already produce music and poetry and things like that. Yeah, it's not really works of genius, but it might be good enough for a lot of people.
So you mentioned your book there, Live Not by Lies, and I wanted to ask you about that because obviously I had the great pleasure of coming to your London premiere of Live Not by Lies, which was made into a documentary by Angel Studios. You're very keenly aware of a lot of the other struggles that the United Kingdom is facing at the moment. And I know that it's something that you're particularly interested in, the crisis of free speech here. Um, how do you see these two issues interlocking, or do you see these two issues interlocking? Are you concerned that artificial intelligence could worsen the crisis of free speech in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, I'm deeply concerned about your country. I mean, as an American, you're the mother country and you're the birthplace of a liberal democracy. And I see from afar this crumbling quickly because of the ruling class, frankly, but maybe that's another topic. But I think what's going to happen is, and this is what I fear happening, is that governments, not just the UK government, but all governments, in an attempt to maintain order in the face of civil disorder, maybe even civil war, they will turn to artificial intelligence and to a social credit system like the Chinese use. And they can harness high technology as a way of social control. We already know, of course, that the UK is maybe next to China, the most surveilled country in the world in terms of having CCTV cameras everywhere. Using that and facial recognition and other aspects of digital technology, combined with the power of AI, it's very easy to see a digital totalitarianism emerging in the UK. And if it happens in the UK, it's going to happen everywhere else.
Well, the way that you have described AI in sort of demonic terms, and of course, Satan is the father of lies. Do you see this as being, and not just the artificial intelligence, but the general trajectory of the United Kingdom, of the West more generally, towards an increasing sort of distortion and departure from the truth and reality of human existence? I know that in your latest book, you also talk about disenchantment, and
Mm-hmm.
these seem to be, all part of the same degrading process.
Right. Well, what I mean by disenchantment, and I speak of it in a particularly Christian way of thinking. I mean, the effect that the modern world, the post Enlightenment world, the world of science and technology has cast mystery out of the material world. Prior to the modern era, everyone, all Christians, believed that in some mysterious sense, God was present in the material world. This is called sacramentality, and I don't want to get too theological here, but this is what was the common belief of all Christians. And we've lost that as man's power to control nature has increased thanks to science and technology. We have lost a sense that there is a mystery, a fundamental mystery built into the material world that we must respect. We've come to think of the material world as nothing but stuff, dead matter, on which we can imprint our own will. And this has led us, I think, to the point we're at now, where we are given this temptation of total control over the entire material world through AI and technology. And we somehow think that will give us liberation. But in fact, it will be our enslavement. I think that the only way out of this, I mean, we're not going to stop AI, it's coming. All we can do is learn how to ride the wave. A professor I know at Catholic University in Washington said that a medieval peasant would have been better able psychologically to cope with the world now coming into being, the world of artificial intelligence, than a modern person. Why is that? Because a medieval peasant, a Christian, lived in a psychological world in which he recognized that there were other intelligences separate from himself that could be dangerous to get mixed up with too much. And he had strategies for how to deal with that. I think all of us, are going to have to learn how to be medieval in that particular sense, and realizing that when we erase the border, the of the buffered self, of the border between ourselves and the machines, we become extremely vulnerable spiritually and psychologically. We're going to have to learn how to reimpose those limits, and have to learn how to navigate a world in which there are other intelligences, artificial or not, outside of us, that don't necessarily have our best good at heart. And frankly, I think that really the only way out of this is for the peoples of the West, the people of Britain, the people of the United States, France, everywhere, to return to our ancestral religion, Christianity, because that will keep us grounded in what I believe is really real. I should say one more thing, Emma, before we go. One of the most incredible conversations I had in my life happened in Oxford in 2022. A young man, an Anglican seminarian named Daniel Kim, approached me at a conference, and he said, Sir, I think your generation doesn't know something about mine. He was 27, I was in my 50s. You think that the greatest challenge to Christianity is atheism. Well, it's not true for my generation. I said, Oh, what is it for your generation? He said, The occult. And he went on to talk about examples of occult thinking, ranging from minor level things like astrology and tarot cards, all the way up to paganism and witchcraft, and even open Satanism. He talked about how two of his employees in his former office were open Satanists, because they defined Satanism as learning how to be the fullest expression of being human, of exercising human will. He said, I know that when I become a priest, I'll be dealing with this for the rest of my life. But your generation, you don't even know it exists. Well, I was really struck by that conversation. And afterward, I did some research into the spiritual lives of the so-called Zoomers, those in their 20s and 30s. And it's really true, Emma, that atheism doesn't have a lot of appeal for them, but they also don't have any interest in Christianity or traditional religion. What they're interested in is an experience of transcendence, of mystery, of the very thing that modernity, the post-Enlightenment period, has kicked out of our daily lives. But they also don't want it if they have to submit to God. And the use of psychedelics, occult rituals, things like that, give them that feeling of being connected to mystery and transcendence without having to actually make a sacrifice. Now, I think this will cost them their souls ultimately. But I'm excited to see that Pope Leo, the new Catholic Pope, pays a lot of attention to AI, because I think he understands implicitly that it is part and parcel of this false re-enchantment of the world, not simply through the occult and Satanism and things like that, but also through giving people who use AI, who may never have any interest in Ouija boards or the occult rituals, it gives them a sense that the world is somehow re-enchanted through the mysteries of AI, through the things that we can know through AI, through the miraculous solutions for our lives that AI brings us.
And of course, the other party to this, particularly here in the United Kingdom, but also in the West more broadly, is Islam. And I know that you have spoken about Professor David Betz's coming forward and expressing his concerns. He's an expert in civil wars, and he's expressed his concerns that we are part of the way down the road on that trajectory towards civil war. I believe that is something that you agree with. Is that something that you're concerned about here in the United Kingdom? Do you see that as being something on the near horizon for us?
Oh, good Lord, yes. I mean, it's when I discovered David Betts earlier this year from his podcast with Louise Perry and his subsequent podcast, it really made a lot of disparate data come into focus for me. I think that we are very much in danger of this. And since I first heard David Betts, when I traveled to the UK, if I talk to older people, people of my generation, I'm 58 and older, people who are stakeholders in the establishment, they think this is nonsense. But when I get outside of London and talk to ordinary Brits, and especially young British people, they they accept it as given that this is coming. I found the same exact thing traveling in France this year. They believe it's coming. They believe that the center cannot hold with Islam, with radical Islam. We cannot live together, and that the whole liberal idea of multiculturalism has been a total failure. I think, in fact, that's one reason why we're seeing in France a return to the Catholic faith by so many people. This past Ash Wednesday, the Catholics in France were shocked that the churches were full. I think people sense that they're at the verge of losing their civilization to Islam, or at least to having a civil war with Islam. Nobody wants this. But because we don't want it doesn't mean it can't happen. And I think that we face a choice. And the French novelist Michel Houellebecq writes about this in his 2015 novel, Submission. He writes of a France of the near future in which the greater population, not Muslim, are morally and spiritually exhausted. They're looking for a solution. So they decide to vote into office an Islamist government, thinking maybe these people will somehow be able to solve our problems. The choice faced by the protagonist, the writer, the academic, who's the main character, is: do I submit to Islam to have an easier life in this new order? Or do I perhaps return to my ancestral religion, Christianity? Or what do I do? And he eventually decides to submit to Islam because it's easy. It's a cynical conversion. He gets 3 wives and a permanent position. Now, this is a novel, but the choice that Welbeck presents in the novel is one that I think all Europeans are eventually going to have to face. You have among us, I mean, I live in Europe, talking to you from Budapest. You have among us a very strong and rising minority that has made a lot of power alliances with left wing parties, with Labour in your country, with the left in France, and so forth. And they are going from strength to strength. They are protected by the ruling class in all of these countries, who, for some reason, would rather crack down on their own people who object to this than crack down on the criminals within the Islamic community. And eventually, a choice will be made to submit or to fight. I went to see Renaud Camus, who was banned by the Starmer government from coming to Oxford to speak. He's the older French philosopher who came up with the idea of the Great Replacement. And when I went to visit him this year, he said, look, I hope it doesn't come to civil war, but if it came to that, I would rather fight than submit. And I think this question is going to be very much front to mind as we go along, as the system, the peace that our governments are trying to impose by force and by the 2-tier justice system and by this sort of thing, as that begins to break apart, this is a choice people are going to have to face. Let me emphasize, I do not want this to happen. Nobody should want this to happen. But again, just because we don't want it to happen doesn't mean it won't happen, because I cannot believe the British people or any people will continue to be humiliated by their own governments, by their own media, by their own academia, and told to hate themselves and submit to this insane ideology.
Well, quite. It should be a wake up call to people to try and avoid that fate. One final question for you, Rob, because I know that one of your early books was the Benedict option, and you've also written in Live Not by Lies about those who, before communism, set about taking certain actions to keep the candle, the flame of civilization burning and of Christianity burning throughout those communist years. What do you think people should be doing? Because, of course, there are lots of people in the UK now who are feeling this sort of surge of patriotic feeling. They're going out into the streets, they're protesting. But others are talking about the option of sort of retreating, in a sense, and focusing on really sort of keeping their own culture alive. What would your advice be to those who are concerned about this? Because, of course, we're facing this kind of hydra of different crises at the moment. What, in your opinion, through having studied the history of this and also theology at such lengths, what's your advice for how best to sail through this crisis and come out the other side with the truth still intact?
Well, I came up with the idea of the Benedict option, naming it after Saint Benedict of Nursia, the founder or one of the founders of Western monasticism. And he built his monastic movement out of the ruins of the Western Roman Empire. And all he was seeking to do was to find a way for Christians to live in meaningful community, spiritually disciplined community in a time of great chaos and darkness. But he never intended to rebuild Europe, but that's exactly what happened. I mean, the Benedictine monks over the centuries of the early Middle Ages, with the foundation of monasteries, they preserved learning and knowledge, and they began to educate people and to reconquer areas that had fallen into barbarism. And they laid the groundwork for the rebirth of European civilization. Well, I wrote a book, this book, Benedict Option, asking simply, what would St. Benedict have to say to us, to we lay Christians who aren't called to the monastery but live in the world? How can we benefit from his wisdom? And the answer, I think, is to both be in the world as we must be, but also step back to a significant degree from the world for the sake of deepening our faith commitment, deepening our knowledge of our traditions, deepening our spiritual practices, and forming strong communities so that when we go into the world and have to live in a post Christian world, and maybe even a post Christian world of violence and chaos, we will know how to live as Christians. I focused in Live Not by Lies on a community in Slovakia. A Catholic priest from Croatia in 1943 escaped the Nazis. They were looking for him. He went to Bratislava in Slovakia, and he told his students, the good news is the Germans are going to lose this war. The bad news is when it's over, the Soviets will be ruling this country, and the first thing they're going to do is come after the church. We have to be ready. So this man, Father Kolakovich, built small communities, mostly of young people, because they were the ones who listened to him. Most of the older people thought, "Oh, it will never happen here. That's you're alarmist." But the young people listened, and within 2 years, every town of any size in Slovakia had at least one of these small groups who came together, of all Christians, all Catholics, who came together to pray, to study scripture, but also to talk about the real world problems they were dealing with and try to come up with solutions. Sure enough, everything happened exactly like the priest said it would. But when the communists started closing the churches, the underground church was ready. It was ready to keep the life of the church alive under great persecution. And that's one reason why the Slovak underground church was stronger than it was in many other Soviet countries. Well, what does this have to do with us? I hope that we never face anything like the Soviet totalitarianism, but we could face our own form of totalitarianism. The seeds are already there. We have to keep the church alive, the authentic Christian faith. And the only way that's going to happen is if we get active and contemplative both. That is to say, active in the world, doing the sort of protests that we're seeing now in Britain, thank God, finally, but also forming ourselves deeply by going deeper into the Christian tradition, into scripture, and doing so in small communities and networks of small communities. You have a vicar, an Anglican vicar, the Reverend Daniel French, who has a book coming out about this soon, about how to be the underground church in a time of chaos and persecution. I hope that any readers of my book, The Benedict Option, Live Not by Lies, Living in Wonder, which are all available in the UK, I hope you'll look for Father Daniel's book too, because this skill, this knowledge, this wisdom is going to be incredibly important in the very near future. And but there is hope. I keep hearing about the quiet revival of young people who are realizing that there is a meaning crisis and the church offers a solution. You're probably not going to find it in some of the woke mainstream churches, but it's still there. And we need to find each other as Christians, as faithful Christians, work across denominational lines. I find I have much more in common as an Eastern Orthodox Christian with Catholics and Protestants who see what I see and who are alarmed about it and want to do something about it to strengthen the church, to be resilient through whatever comes. I have more in common with them than I do with people of my own faith tradition who don't see anything and think everything's going to be just fine as long as we just keep still and wait.
And whatever happens, it's not going to hurt to invest a little in understanding our own religious and historical traditions. Thank you so much, Dreher, for such an absolutely fascinating conversation. And don't forget to like and subscribe, comment below to let us know what you think. And we'll see you next time.